Joel Anderson woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the curtains, casting a warm golden hue across his modest living room. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirping of birds outside. He slipped out of bed, careful not to make too much noise, and padded to the kitchen. The kitchen was small but meticulously organized. Every item had its place, a testament to Joel's need for order amidst the chaos of life. He pulled out a mixing bowl and started preparing pancake batter, his movements slow and deliberate. As he whisked the batter, he glanced at a framed photograph on the counter. It was a picture of him, his late wife, and their daughter, Ellie, taken during a happier time. His wife's laughter seemed to echo in the room, a haunting reminder of what they had lost. The smell of pancakes soon filled the air, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Joel set the table for two, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the backyard in the center. He took a deep breath, letting the familiar routine anchor him. A soft patter of footsteps announced Ellie's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, wearing an oversized t-shirt that almost swallowed her small frame. Her eyes, still heavy with sleep, brightened when she saw the pancakes. "Morning, Dad. What's for breakfast?" she asked, her voice a blend of sleepiness and excitement. "Pancakes, your favorite," Joel replied with a smile. "Ready to seize the day?" Ellie nodded enthusiastically, sliding into her chair. Joel watched her, his heart swelling with a mix of love and pride. Despite everything, Ellie remained a beacon of light in his life, her resilience and optimism a constant source of inspiration. After breakfast, Joel cleared the table while Ellie got ready for school. He listened to the sounds of her moving around the house, the familiar rhythm of their morning routine bringing a sense of normalcy to his day. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. Their house was a small single-story structure, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The lawn was neatly trimmed with colorful flower beds lining the walkway. Joel had worked hard to maintain the house and garden, finding solace in the physical labor and the beauty of nature. It was a stark contrast to the life he had left behind, the high-rise apartment, the demanding job, the constant hustle and bustle. Here, he found peace. Joel took a sip of his coffee, savoring the warmth and bitterness. He watched as the neighborhood slowly came to life. Children riding their bikes, neighbors walking their dogs, the mailman making his rounds. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. Ellie emerged from the house, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore a bright yellow dress, her hair neatly braided. Joel smiled at the sight of her, so full of energy and life. "Ready for school?" he asked. "Ready as I'll ever be," Ellie replied with a grin. She skipped down the steps and joined Joel on the porch. They walked to the bus stop together, enjoying the cool morning air. At the bus stop, other children gathered, chatting and laughing. Joel stood back, watching as Ellie joined her friends. She fit in so easily, her laughter blending with theirs. It was a relief to see her happy, to know that she had found a place where she belonged. The bus arrived with a screech of brakes, and the children clambered on board. Ellie turned and waved at Joel from the window, her smile bright and reassuring. He waved back, feeling a pang of bittersweet emotion. As the bus pulled away, Joel lingered for a moment, soaking in the tranquility of the morning. Joel walked back to the house, his steps slow and measured. The day had just begun, and there was much to do. Joel walked down the tree-lined street, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The houses in this part of town were charming, each with its own personality reflected in the well-kept gardens and colorful paint. As he walked, Joel took in the sights and sounds, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his stomach. He had decided to visit some of his neighbors to clear the air and build some bridges. The recent events had cast a shadow over his and Ellie's life, and he hoped that by reaching out he could start to mend some of the strained relationships. Joel approached Liz's house with a sense of apprehension. Liz had always been particularly critical of him, her judgmental glances and curt comments making it clear that she didn't think highly of a single father raising a daughter alone. Still, he was determined to try. He knocked on the door and waited. After a moment, Liz opened the door, her face a mask of surprise and something that looked like disdain. "Joel," she said, her voice flat. "What brings you here?" "Hi, Liz," Joel began, trying to sound friendly. "I just wanted to check in and see how things are going. I know there's been some tension, and I'd like to clear the air if we can." Liz crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Tension? You mean because of the way you've been making everyone uncomfortable?" Joel forced a smile. "I know it hasn't been easy, but I'm just trying to do what's best for Ellie. We're all part of this community, and I want to make sure we're on good terms." Liz's eyes narrowed slightly. "Good terms? Joel, it's not just about you. It's about the safety and comfort of our children. Your presence has been unsettling for some of us." Joel felt a flicker of frustration but kept his voice calm. "Liz, I've always had Ellie's best interests at heart. I just want to make sure she's growing up in a supportive environment. That's why I'm here, to try and build some understanding." Liz sighed, uncrossing her arms, but not stepping aside. "Look, Joel, I appreciate you coming over, but I'm not sure what you expect to happen. People talk, and there are concerns." "I understand that," Joel said, nodding. "I just hope that we can move past the rumors and see each other for who we really are." Liz glanced back into her house, then looked at Joel again. "I have a lot to do today. Maybe another time, Joel." Joel nodded, feeling the sting of her dismissal. "Sure, another time." "Thanks for listening, Liz." As he turned to leave, a loud crash came from inside the house. Liz's face twisted with anger and frustration as she rushed back inside. Joel hesitated on the porch, unsure if he should stay and help or leave as Liz had suggested. "Mum, the vase broke," came a young voice from inside. Joel took a step back, deciding it was best to leave. He walked down the steps, his mind churning. The dance studio was unusually quiet that evening. The usual hum of chatter and laughter from the parents watching their children was replaced by an unsettling silence. Joel sat on a wooden bench, his eyes following Ellie as she twirled gracefully across the polished floor. He tried to focus on her movements, but his mind was clouded with unease. Liz stood near the entrance, her eyes fixed on Joel with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. She whispered something to one of the other mothers, who nodded solemnly. Liz squared her shoulders and began walking towards Joel, her footsteps echoing ominously in the hushed room. Joel sensed her approach and looked up, his face betraying a flicker of apprehension. "Liz," he greeted her, trying to keep his tone neutral. Liz didn't return the greeting. Instead, she crossed her arms and looked down at him, her expression hardening. "Joel, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cold. Joel nodded, standing up slowly. "What is it?" Liz took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I know you took my necklace," she said, each word dripping with accusation. The room seemed to freeze. Joel's face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. He felt a rush of panic, but forced himself to stay calm. "Liz, I didn't take anything, you're wrong." he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his efforts to steady it. Liz's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, Joel. You were at my house yesterday. My necklace was there, and now it's gone. What else am I supposed to think?" Joel shook his head, feeling the weight of the room's attention on him. Parents and children alike had stopped to listen, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. "I don't know what happened to your necklace, but I didn't take it," he insisted, his voice growing firmer. Liz's lips pressed into a thin line. "You expect me to believe that? You, a single father, struggling to make ends meet, wouldn't be tempted to take something valuable?" Joel's face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I've never stolen anything in my life, Liz. I may be a single father, but that doesn't make me a thief." Liz glanced around the room, her eyes meeting those of the other parents. "Does anyone else believe him?" she asked, her voice rising. "He's been acting suspiciously for weeks, and now my necklace is missing." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some parents nodded in agreement, while others looked uncertain. Joel felt a sinking sensation in his chest. He turned to Ellie, who had stopped dancing and was watching the scene unfold with wide, frightened eyes. "Daddy?" Ellie's small voice broke through the tension. "What's happening?" Joel swallowed hard, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's okay, Ellie. Everything's going to be fine." Liz wasn't finished. "If you didn't take it, then prove it. Let's search your house," she demanded. Joel's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had nothing to hide, but the idea of strangers going through his home filled him with dread. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "If that's what it takes to clear my name, then go ahead." Liz looked at him, her expression unreadable. "We'll see," she said softly, almost to herself. The parents began to disperse, some casting lingering glances at Joel. He stood there, feeling the weight of their suspicion pressing down on him. Ellie ran over and hugged him tightly, her small frame trembling. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Joel whispered, his voice cracking. "We'll get through this." As they left the studio, Joel felt a heavy sense of foreboding. The accusation had been made, and now the real battle to prove his innocence was about to begin. The quiet streets seemed unusually hostile as they walked home, the shadows lengthening under the dim streetlights. Joel sat by the window, his silhouette dark against the fading light. He held a mug of coffee, now cold, between his hands, his eyes fixed on the gathering darkness outside. The room around him was a testament to his life's quiet chaos. Stacks of books teetered on the edge of the coffee table, a half-folded laundry basket sat by the couch, and Ellie's school projects decorated the walls with vibrant splashes of color. Joel's thoughts wandered, as they often did in these still moments. He could almost hear her laughter, soft and melodic, filling the room with warmth. He remembered the way her fingers felt as they intertwined with his, the gentle touch that could calm his most turbulent days. The house had been different then, brighter, fuller, more alive. Her presence had been the glue that held their world together, and in her absence, everything seemed to slowly unravel. A soft knock on the doorframe pulled him from his reverie. Ellie stood there, her eyes wide and questioning. She wore her favorite pajamas, the ones with little stars that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Can I sit with you?" Joel nodded, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "Of course, Ellie. Come here." Ellie crossed the room with light steps, her movements graceful and tentative. She climbed onto the arm of the chair, curling up against him. Joel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She felt small and fragile, yet there was a strength in her that always amazed him. What are you thinking about? Ellie asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Joel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Just the past. Your mom. I miss her a lot, especially on nights like this. Ellie was silent for a moment, her eyes reflecting the fading twilight. I miss her too, she whispered. Sometimes I feel like I can almost remember her voice, but then it slips away. Joel's heart ached at her words. She loved you so much, Ellie. You were her world. She would be so proud of you, of the person you're becoming. Ellie looked up at him, her eyes shining. Do you think she'd be proud of you too? Joel swallowed hard, emotions threatening to choke him. I hope so, he said finally. I'm trying my best. For you. The room grew quieter as the darkness deepened, the only sound the distant hum of traffic outside. Joel glanced around, his gaze lingering on the little details that spoke of their life together. The framed photographs on the mantel, the drawings Ellie had made, the worn but comfortable furniture. Each item held a story, a memory. I remember the first time we brought you home, Joel said, his voice soft. Your mum was so excited. She had everything planned out. She wanted everything to be perfect for you. Ellie smiled faintly. Tell me more about her. Joel took a deep breath, drawing strength from the memories. She had this incredible way of making everything seem brighter. She loved to dance, especially in the kitchen while we cooked. She'd put on some music and we'd twirl around, laughing like kids. Ellie giggled, the sound lightening Joel's heart. I wish I could remember that. I wish you could too, Joel said, his voice tinged with sadness. But I'm glad I can tell you about her. It keeps her alive in a way, don't you think? Ellie nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, it does. I feel like I know her better every time you talk about her. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night settling around them like a comforting blanket. The world outside seemed distant, less daunting as they shared these quiet moments. Joel looked down at Ellie, her eyes now half closed, fighting sleep. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. It's getting late, kiddo. Time for bed. Ellie yawned, stretching. Can you stay with me until I fall asleep? Always, Joel replied, standing up and lifting her into his arms. He carried her to her room, the familiar path worn with years of nightly routines. As he tucked Ellie into bed, she reached out and grabbed his hand. Good night, Dad. Good night, Ellie, Joel said, his voice filled with love and reassurance. Sweet dreams. He sat beside her until her breathing deepened and she drifted into sleep, the peaceful rise and fall of her chest a balm to his weary soul. As he left her room, Joel felt a glimmer of hope. They were moving forward, step by step, even through the shadows of the past. Ellie sat at a wooden table in the school library, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the rows of bookshelves. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of pages and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She glanced around, noting the mix of students engrossed in their studies, before turning her attention back to the laptop in front of her. Across from Ellie sat Dana, her best friend, who was equally absorbed in the task at hand. The two girls had been sifting through online articles and old newspaper clippings for the past hour, searching for any clue that might help clear Joel's name. Look at this, Ellie whispered, leaning closer to the screen. There was another theft in our neighborhood just last month. It happened at Mrs. Thompson's house, only a few blocks away from where Liz lives. Dana's eyes widened as she scanned the article. Do you think it's connected? It could be the same person trying to pin it on your dad. Ellie nodded, her brow furrowing in concentration. It has to be. Dad would never steal anything. We just need to find more evidence to prove it. Dana reached for a notepad, scribbling down the details from the article. We should show this to your dad. Maybe he can talk to Mrs. Thompson and see if she noticed anything suspicious. The library door creaked open, and Ellie glanced up to see Mrs. Jensen, the librarian, eyeing them curiously. Ellie gave a quick smile and wave, hoping to avoid any questions. Mrs. Jensen returned the gesture, then continued on her rounds, her footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Ellie leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her young shoulders, but she was determined to help her father. The image of Joel's face, pale and drawn with stress, flashed in her mind, fueling her resolve. "Ellie, are you okay?" Dana's voice was soft, her concern evident. Ellie forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine, just worried, I guess. It's a lot to handle, you know?" Dana reached across the table, giving Ellie's hand a reassuring squeeze. "We'll figure this out. Your dad's innocent, and we'll prove it." Ellie took a deep breath, letting Dana's words soothe her anxiety. "Thanks, Dana. I don't know what I'd do without you." Dana grinned, her usual exuberance returning. "Hey, that's what friends are for. Now let's keep digging. There's got to be more we can find." As they continued their research, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the library. The quiet atmosphere seemed to envelop them, creating a sense of focus and determination. Ellie's fingers flew over the keyboard, her eyes scanning each article with a sharp intensity. "Here's something," Dana said suddenly, breaking the silence. "There was a report of a suspicious person seen near Mrs. Thompson's house the night of the theft. A neighbor mentioned it to the police, but they didn't follow up because there wasn't enough evidence." Ellie's heart quickened. "Did they give a description?" Dana read aloud from the screen. "The neighbor described a tall man in a dark hoodie, seen walking away from the house around midnight. They thought it was odd because he seemed to be looking around nervously." Ellie jotted down the details in her notebook, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to find out if anyone else saw this person. Maybe someone else in the neighborhood noticed something strange that night." Dana nodded, her enthusiasm matching Ellie's. "Let's make a list of all the houses around Mrs. Thompson's. We can go door to door and ask if anyone remembers seeing anything unusual." As they mapped out their plan, the library began to empty, students packing up their belongings and heading home. Ellie glanced at the clock, realizing how late it had gotten. "We should probably get going. My dad will be wondering where I am." Dana agreed, gathering her things. "I'll come over to your place after dinner. We can start going through the list then." Ellie smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "Thanks, Dana. You're the best." They exited the library together, the cool evening air refreshing after the stuffy warmth inside. The school grounds were quiet, the last rays of sunlight casting a golden hue over the trees and buildings. As they walked, Ellie couldn't help but feel a sense of determination settle over her. She knew they had a long road ahead, but with Dana by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The path to clearing her father's name was fraught with uncertainty, but Ellie was prepared to fight for the truth. As she and Dana parted ways at the school gates, Ellie's resolve hardened. She would prove Joel's innocence, no matter what it took. Joel's shop was a sanctuary of sorts, filled with the comforting smell of sawdust and the hum of machinery. The clutter of tools and unfinished projects gave the place a lived-in feel, each piece telling a story of its own. Joel was at his workbench, carefully sanding a piece of oak when the bell above the door chimed. He looked up to see Tanner standing in the doorway, his broad frame blocking out the light. Tanner hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Morning," Tanner said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Morning," Joel replied, setting his work aside. "What brings you here?" Tanner shrugged, his expression guarded. "Thought you could use a hand. Figured it's time we talked." Joel nodded, appreciating the gesture but wary of the conversation that was sure to follow. "Sure. Grab a pair of gloves. I've got a lot to get through today." Tanner moved to the workbench, slipping on a pair of worn leather gloves. He picked up a piece of wood and began sanding, his movements steady and practiced. The two men worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of sandpaper and the hum of the machines. The tension between them was palpable, a silent reminder of the events that had brought them to this point. Finally, Tanner broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "Look, Joel, I don't know what happened with Liz's necklace, but I know you, and I believe you didn't steal it." Joel looked up, his eyes meeting Tanner's. "Thanks, Tanner. That means a lot, but believing me is one thing, proving it is another story." Tanner grunted, a sound of agreement. "Yeah, it is. People talk, and once they get an idea in their heads, it's hard to change it." Joel sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "I just want to clear my name, for Ellie's sake. She deserves better than this." Tanner nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Ellie's a good kid. She doesn't deserve any of this." The two men fell silent again, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. Joel could feel the frustration building inside him, the unfairness of it all gnawing at his patience. "Why do you think Liz is so convinced I took it?" Joel asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Tanner shrugged, his hands never pausing in their work. "Liz. She's always been quick to judge, and she's scared. People do stupid things when they're scared." Joel nodded, understanding but not forgiving. "I just wish she'd listen. Really listen." Tanner looked at Joel, his eyes serious. "Maybe she will in time, but for now, we need to focus on what we can do. Any ideas on how to prove you didn't take that necklace?" Joel shook his head, feeling the weight of the problem pressing down on him. "Not yet, but I'm not giving up." Tanner nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "That's the spirit. We'll figure this out. Together." The words hung in the air, a promise of solidarity that Joel hadn't expected. He felt a flicker of hope, a small but significant shift in the atmosphere. As the day wore on, the two men continued to work side by side, the rhythm of their labor a comforting background to their thoughts. They spoke occasionally, their conversation drifting from work to family and back again. Slowly, the tension between them eased, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cluttered shop, Joel felt a renewed sense of determination. He looked at Tanner, grateful for the unexpected support. "Thanks for today, Tanner," Joel said, his voice sincere. "I appreciate it." Tanner nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The next day, the community hall buzzed with hushed conversations, the usual friendly atmosphere replaced by an undercurrent of tension. The wooden floor creaked under the weight of the assembled neighbors, each of them curious and wary. Joel stood at the front, feeling the weight of their gazes, some sympathetic, others hostile. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "I wanted to address the rumors and accusations that have been circulating." The murmurs quieted, all eyes now fixed on him. Joel glanced at Ellie, sitting near the front with a worried expression. He drew strength from her presence, determined to protect her from the storm of suspicion surrounding them. "I understand that as a single father, I might stand out," Joel continued, his voice steady but with an edge of vulnerability. But being different doesn't make me a thief. I have faced many challenges, but we've always tried to be good neighbors and contribute to our community. He paused, looking around the room, trying to gauge the crowd's reaction. Some faces softened, but Liz remained unmoved, her expression as cold and unyielding as ever. She sat with her arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if daring him to convince her otherwise. Joel took a deep breath, feeling the frustration and determination welling up inside him. "I deserve respect and understanding, not judgment," he said, his voice rising slightly. "We all make mistakes, but accusing someone without evidence is not how we should treat each other." A few heads nodded in agreement, but Liz's gaze remained icy. Joel met her eyes, hoping to reach her. "Liz, I know you've had concerns, but I promise you, I didn't take your necklace. I would never do something like that." Liz's lips pressed into a thin line. "And why should we believe you, Joel?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Your presence has been unsettling, and the timing is too coincidental." Joel felt a surge of anger but kept his voice calm. "Because I'm telling the truth, because I have nothing to hide. We've always been honest and open with everyone here." Liz shook her head, her eyes flashing with skepticism. "Words are easy, Joel, but actions speak louder, and your actions have raised too many questions." Joel took a step closer, his eyes locked on Liz's. "Then let's find the answers together. Search my house again, talk to my friends and neighbors. Look into every corner of my life if you need to. I have nothing to hide." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Liz's expression wavered, a flicker of doubt crossing her face, but she quickly masked it with a look of steely resolve. "Fine," she said, standing up. "But until we have proof, I'm not changing my mind." Joel nodded, accepting her challenge. "I understand, but I ask everyone here to give me the benefit of the doubt, to not rush to judgment based on fear and suspicion." Tanner, standing near the back, stepped forward. "Joel's right," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "We owe it to him to be fair. We've all known him for years. Let's not forget that." A few more murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Joel felt a glimmer of hope. He looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as he could, trying to convey his sincerity and determination. The meeting slowly broke up, people dispersing in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Joel felt the weight of Liz's stare on his back, cold and unforgiving. Dana's house was alive with the sounds of chatter and laughter. The smell of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, mixing with the scent of blooming flowers from the garden just outside. The house was a charming mix of old and new, with worn, comfortable furniture and bright, cheerful decor. Ellie stood in the hallway, feeling a bit out of place amidst the activity. "Come on up to my room, Ellie," Dana called, her voice bright and welcoming. Ellie followed her up the creaking wooden stairs, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. Dana's room was a reflection of her vibrant personality. Posters of bands and celebrities covered the walls, and her desk was cluttered with art supplies and school books. Ellie's eyes roamed the room, taking in the chaotic yet cozy space. Dana flopped onto her bed, her hair spilling over the pillow like a waterfall of golden curls. Ellie, feeling a bit awkward, moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "Thanks for inviting me over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dana smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "No problem. It's nice to have some company." As they chatted about school and their favorite movies, Ellie's eyes kept drifting to a small jewelry box on Dana's dresser. It was slightly ajar, and something inside caught the light, glinting brightly. Unable to resist, Ellie stood up and walked over to the dresser. "What's this?" she asked, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the box. Dana's face paled, her eyes widening. "Oh, that's just some old stuff," she said quickly, sitting up. "Nothing important." Ellie lifted the lid, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the familiar string of pearls nestled inside. It was the missing necklace, the one that had caused so much trouble for her father. Her eyes widened in shock and relief. "Dana," Ellie whispered, turning to face her friend. "Why didn't you tell anyone? This could have saved my dad a lot of pain." Dana's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what to do. I found it in the living room one day and I didn't know who it belonged to. When all the accusations started flying, I panicked." Ellie's heart ached for her friend. She moved to sit beside Dana, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You should have told someone," she said gently. "Keeping it hidden only made things worse." Dana nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know. I'm so sorry, Ellie. I never meant for your dad to get blamed." Ellie took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "We have to tell our parents," she said firmly. "They need to know the truth." Dana nodded again, her face resolute. "You're right. Let's go." Together they made their way downstairs, the weight of their discovery pressing heavily on their shoulders. They found Liz and Tanner in the living room, talking quietly. The room fell silent as the girls entered, their expressions grave. "Mum, Dad, we need to talk," Dana said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She held out the necklace, the pearls gleaming in the afternoon light. Liz's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dana, where did you get that?" Dana explained everything, her voice trembling as she recounted how she had found the necklace and hidden it out of fear. Liz's face softened with understanding, but there was also a deep sadness in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Joel," Liz said, turning to face him. "We've caused you and Ellie so much pain because of a misunderstanding." Joel, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, stepped forward. His face was a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I appreciate your apology, Liz," he said softly. "But what's important now is that the truth is out." Ellie felt a wave of relief wash over her. The burden of uncertainty had finally lifted, and the path to clearing her father's name was now clear. She reached out and took Joel's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Together?" Joel nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Yes, we will," he replied. "Thank you, Dana. You did the right thing." Dana gave a small, tearful smile. "I'm just glad I could help." As the family sat down to discuss the next steps, Ellie felt a sense of hope blossoming in her chest. The journey wasn't over, but they had taken a significant step towards healing and redemption. And for the first time in a long time, Ellie felt that everything was going to be okay. The community hall buzzed with low murmurs and rustling as neighbors filled the wooden benches, their conversations a blend of curiosity and tension. The sun filtered through the large windows, casting a warm, golden light across the room, but it did little to ease the collective unease. Joel stood at the front, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His heart raced, but his face remained calm and composed. Beside him, Ellie stood close, her presence a constant source of strength. He scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces, some sympathetic, others skeptical. He took a deep breath, preparing to speak. Before he could, Liz stood up from her seat in the middle of the room. She walked slowly to the front, her expression a mix of regret and determination. The murmurs quieted and all eyes turned to her. Joel met her gaze, searching for any sign of hostility, but found none. "Joel," Liz began, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong about you." She paused, looking down at her hands before raising her eyes to meet his again. "I let my fears and biases cloud my judgment. I caused you and Ellie so much pain, and for that, I deeply apologize." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Joel felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her apology. "Thank you, Liz. It means a lot," he replied, his voice calm and sincere. Liz turned to face the community, her expression earnest. "I know many of you felt the same way I did. We were quick to judge without knowing the full story. Joel and Ellie deserve our support and respect, not our suspicion." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Tanner stood up next, his tall frame commanding attention. "Joel has been a part of this community for years. He's a good man and a dedicated father. We owe it to him and Ellie to make things right." Joel felt a wave of emotion swell within him. The room, which had once felt hostile and cold, now seemed to be thawing. He glanced at Ellie, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. He drew strength from her and stepped forward to address the crowd. "I appreciate your words, Liz and Tanner," Joel began, his voice strong and clear. "This has been a difficult time for Ellie and me, but we're not here to dwell on the past. We're here to move forward. I've always believed in this community, in our ability to come together and support one another. I'm grateful for your willingness to listen and to understand." He paused, letting his words sink in. The faces in the crowd reflected a range of emotions: guilt, regret, and a growing sense of unity. Joel continued, "I want to thank those who stood by us, who believed in us when it was hard. And for those who doubted, I hope we can start anew with understanding and compassion." The room was quiet, the tension gradually dissipating. Joel felt a sense of relief wash over him. The path to redemption had begun, not just for him, but for the entire community. He looked at Ellie, her eyes shining with pride and hope. Liz stepped forward again, her face softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Joel, for your patience, for your forgiveness. We've all learned a valuable lesson." Joel nodded, feeling a sense of closure. "We all make mistakes, Liz. What matters is that we learn from them and strive to be better." The crowd began to applaud, the sound growing louder and more unified. Joel felt a sense of warmth and acceptance enveloping him. He looked around the room, seeing the faces of his neighbors, not as adversaries, but as members of a community willing to heal and grow together. As the applause died down, people began to approach Joel and Ellie, offering words of support and apologies. Joel felt the weight of the past weeks lifting, replaced by a renewed sense of belonging. Ellie hugged her father tightly. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with relief and joy. Joel smiled, holding her close. "Yes, we did, sweetheart. Together." As the hall gradually emptied, Joel and Ellie stood at the center, surrounded by their community. The journey had been long and painful, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbroken. And for the first time in a long time, Joel felt a profound sense of peace and hope for the future.